Hi, very glad to see you on the channel. Before you start listening to the story, write in the comments whether you like the voice on the video. I've been up north for 9 days helping my brother mend his old cabin before winter settled in too deep, the kind of chore that's part work, part tradition. We'd patch leaky gutters, stack wood, fix fences, nothing glamorous but good for the soul. Samantha didn't mind. She practically shoved me out the door with a lunch packed and a smile. Go, she said. You need it. And I did. The cabin was tucked between a ridge and a slow-moving creek, far from town and even farther from whatever responsibilities waited back home. I spent evenings by the fire, sipping black coffee, watching the snow flirt with the tree line, not thinking much beyond how peaceful it all was. When I finally pulled back into our driveway, I expected the usual welcome, Samantha greeting me with a tired but honest hug, maybe the dogs barking, the porch light glowing. Instead, the place looked staged. The porch steps had been swept clean, not a trace of the muddy boot prints or wind-blown leaves that always gathered there. The flower beds had been trimmed and mulched, though Samantha never cared much for gardening this late in the season. Inside, it hit me stronger. The scent, vanilla and lavender, clung thick to the air like someone had tried to mask the usual smells of wood smoke and worn leather. The floors were spotless, windows wiped clean, and the kitchen, set like a display. A new vase of fresh-cut flowers, wildflowers, no less, out of season, sat dead center on the table. Samantha came bustling out of the laundry room when she heard me. "Oh, you're back early," she said, wiping her hands on a dish towel, eyes flicking nervously between me and the table. I set my bag down slowly. Yeah, finished up sooner than I thought. I took in her appearance, hair done up, makeup fresh like she'd been expecting someone else entirely. "House looks good," I added, forcing a smile. "What's the occasion?" She laughed, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Just figured I'd surprise you. Thought you'd like it." She moved around the kitchen, busying herself with dishes that didn't need washing, never once meeting my eyes fully. Dinner that night was homemade stew and cornbread, her best, the kind she usually saved for birthdays or church potlucks. I try to focus on the food, on the quiet clatter of forks against plates, but the conversation kept drifting to the upcoming barn dance. Samantha talked about how Emily at the feed store was swamped and might need some help setting up. She rattled on about harvest season, the new neighbors down the road, and every other thing under the sun, but never once asked about my trip. Not really, just polite nods when I mentioned the repairs. When the dishes were cleared and the house quieted, Samantha leaned into me like nothing was wrong, like everything was exactly the same as when I left. But it wasn't. I could feel it in the way her hand hesitated on my arm, in the way her smile lingered a second too long. Later, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling while she slept peacefully beside me, I kept replaying the details. The scrub porch, the flowers, the nervous energy in her voice. Something was off, and no matter how hard I tried to push it down, I couldn't shake it. The house wasn't just clean, it was cleared like someone had tried too hard to wipe something away. I told myself, maybe she was just trying to welcome me home. Maybe it was guilt about not coming with me to the cabin this year, or maybe she was anxious about the upcoming dance, but deep down, the knot in my stomach said otherwise. I watched the ceiling until dawn, wondering what exactly I'd missed while I was gone. And who? The next few days I kept my mouth shut, but my eyes open. Samantha was playing the part of the perfect wife just a little too well. She made my favorite casserole Tuesday night, baked a peach cobbler Wednesday, and even ironed my church shirts without being asked, humming softly the whole time. It wasn't like her. Samantha was a lot of things, but domestic goddess wasn't one of them. She was sharp, good with people, and worked harder than most, but she'd never bothered to iron a single thing in our whole marriage, let alone all of them in one evening. I didn't mention it. I just watched. Late Thursday afternoon, while she was out running errands, I decided to poke around the mudroom where she usually kept her gardening stuff and horse tack. It wasn't snooping. Not at first. But tucked behind an old saddlebag was a small, neatly wrapped box. I pulled it out carefully. Inside was a leather bracelet, polished and engraved. For T. Just those 2 letters. Not J for Josh. T. I stared at it for a long time, turning it over in my hands. There was no note, no receipt, nothing else. My first instinct was to drive straight into town, but anger gave way to something colder: calculation. Instead of confronting her, I slipped the bracelet back into the box, resealed it carefully, and left it exactly where I found it. Then, after dinner when Samantha headed off to bed early, I took it back out and made a small adjustment. I went out to the workshop and rubbed a little saddle soap in the leather, but unevenly, leaving it streaked and stained. Subtle enough to ruin it, but not obvious enough to be noticed until it was too late. Petty? Maybe, but something inside me wanted to see how far she'd go. Friday morning, I watched as Samantha grabbed the saddlebag without hesitation and tossed it into the back of the truck, claiming she was off to help Emily with the feed store inventory. She kissed me goodbye and was gone before I could finish my coffee. I followed her, not right away, but far enough behind that she wouldn't notice. Instead of heading straight to Emily's, Samantha took a detour down Miller's Hollow Road, the one that leads toward the old Thompson barn, the same place Tom's family kept horses and held bonfire parties back when we were all kids. I parked at the ridge and watched from the trees. Samantha pulled up, and not 5 minutes later, Tom himself came strolling out of the barn, arms open like he'd been waiting all morning. They talked. Too close. Too familiar. He reached for the saddlebag, and I saw Samantha laughing like it was the best joke in the world. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. The body language said enough. He opened the bag, pulled out the box, and even from a distance, I could see the frown as he noticed the streaked bracelet. Samantha looked confused, clearly unaware of the sabotage. Tom shrugged it off, kissed her on the cheek, and they both disappeared inside the barn. I didn't follow. Not yet. Instead, I sat there watching that barn door, heart pounding but face calm. By the time Samantha returned home hours later, claiming Emily had gotten everything sorted faster than expected, I was already sitting on the porch with a glass of sweet tea, pretending like I hadn't seen a thing. She kissed me on the cheek, smiled, and asked if I wanted to go to the barn dance next weekend like nothing had happened. I just nodded, but inside, I was already miles ahead of her. I spent the weekend watching Samantha like a man, trying to read a book with half the pages missing. She was sweet, almost too sweet. She made plans for the barn dance like it was the only thing on her mind, fussing over what pie to bake for the contest and which boots matched her dress best. Every word out of her mouth sounded rehearsed, like she was determined to sell me on this perfect wife routine. But I wasn't buying it. Not after what I saw. Still, I held back. I wanted more than just a hunch and a ruined bracelet. I needed to be sure. Monday came, and with it a flicker of suspicion that maybe, just maybe, I had read it all wrong. At the feed store, Emily pulled me aside when I dropped by to pick up a few things. "Hey, Josh," she said, her voice low. "Thanks for sending Samantha over Friday. She helped me knock out all the invoices." I froze. "She was there?" I asked. Emily nodded. "Yeah, all afternoon. Didn't leave till nearly 5. My stomach turned. Had I misread everything? Was Tom just a coincidence? Did they really just exchange a gift, maybe old friends catching up? Back home, I asked Samantha how things went at the feed store. She didn't skip a beat. "Long day," she said, wiping flour off her hands while prepping dough. "Emily was a mess, but we got it done." She even tossed in a little laugh, like she had no idea the storm brewing behind my eyes. The timeline didn't make sense. I saw her at Tom's barn midday, yet Emily swore up and down that Samantha was with her the entire afternoon. Something wasn't lining up. That night, as we sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the cornfields, I tried pushing. "You talked to Tom much lately?" I asked casually. Samantha didn't even flinch. "Tom? Not really," she said. "Saw him in passing at the feed store last week, but that's about it." She even sounded annoyed, like the mention of Tom was a bother. I spent the next 2 days doubting myself. Was I turning shadows into monsters? Was I letting the loneliness of that cabin trip make me see things that weren't there? The bracelet could have been for someone else, or maybe it wasn't meant for Tom at all. Samantha's cleaning spree, the odd behavior, they could all have simple explanations. I knew I could make a fool of myself if I wasn't careful. By Wednesday, I started feeling guilty. Maybe I'd been too harsh, too suspicious. After all, Emily vouched for her, and Samantha seemed genuine. That evening, I apologized. I told her I'd been stressed and paranoid. She hugged me tight, whispered, "I'd never do anything to hurt you," and I wanted so badly to believe it. But even as I held her, there's a part of me that couldn't forget the way she smiled after walking out of Tom's barn. The way the bracelet was hidden like it was meant for a secret. And when she thought I wasn't looking, I saw her glance at her phone, read a message, and tuck it away with a sly little grin. That was the moment I knew I wasn't wrong. Not even a little. I just hadn't dug deep enough yet. The next few days, I made it my mission to collect every piece of the puzzle. I didn't argue, didn't push, didn't even hint that I was suspicious again. Samantha seemed to ease up, thinking maybe I'd fully swallowed her sweet little act. She went on about the barn dance, talked about needing to help Emily with decorations, and kept smiling like she was 2 steps ahead. What she didn't know was, I'd started watching more carefully than ever. I noticed little things first. The old saddle blanket missing from the tack room, then reappearing later in the week freshly washed. The way Samantha's boots were caked in red clay. Not the dark soil of Emily's farm, but the distinct dirt from the Thompson property where Tom's barn sat. I knew that dirt like the back of my hand. No one else in town had it. It clung to everything. I also noticed how Samantha's errands always happened to align with Tom's schedule. On Thursday, I watched her leave the house under the excuse of picking up hay with Emily. An hour later, Tom's truck was seen heading down the south road toward his property. And guess who wasn't far behind? I wasn't about to play fool twice, so I drove by Emily's to confirm. "Oh, Samantha?" Emily said, squinting confused. She said she'd be running late today. Said she had to handle something else first. I gave her a polite nod, but inside I was boiling. I thanked her and left. I parked a few ridges away from Tom's barn, watching with binoculars like some second-rate private eye. There she was, my wife, standing outside with Tom, laughing like they were sharing the best joke in the county. No stress, no errands, no rush. Just comfortable. Too comfortable. I could have stormed in right then, demanded answers, but I knew better. This wasn't about catching her with her hand in the cookie jar. It was about letting her fill both hands, thinking no one was watching. That night, she came home with mud on her jeans and that same old tight smile. "Emily's place was a mess," she said, brushing her hair out of her face. "I swear that woman's gonna bury herself in hay one of these days." I almost admired how clean the lie came out. Not a single stutter, not a single twitch. She'd been practicing. Friday morning, Samantha said she'd be spending the whole day at Emily's helping set up for the dance. I acted like I believed her. Gave her a kiss, packed her lunch, even told her I'd see her later at the dance. "Don't be late," she teased on the way out the door. She didn't notice me tailing her 10 minutes later. And sure enough, there it was. Not Emily's. Not Aaron's. Not decorations. Tom's barn. Same truck. Same boots. Same trail. But this time I stayed hidden. I watched long enough to see her step inside, heard the barn door slide shut, and knew without a shadow of a doubt that this wasn't just harmless visits. This wasn't some innocent misunderstanding. This was deliberate, calculated. And it wasn't just Tom's door she was walking through. It was the one slamming shut on whatever was left of our marriage. I spent that Friday night sitting on the porch staring out at the dark fields, letting the silence soak in as the truth settled. There was no denying it anymore. Samantha wasn't just playing around. She was committed to whatever little game she and Tom had been running. I could almost hear the creak of that old barn door echoing in my head, see the way she smiled walking up to it like she belonged there more than she belonged here. But I didn't rage. I didn't punch walls or toss furniture. I just sat there calmly because I knew what had to come next. Saturday morning, Samantha woke up bright-eyed, humming like the guilt never touched her. She busied herself with finishing touches for the barn dance, ironing her dress, brushing her hair, practicing her small-town charm smile in the mirror. "I hope you're ready for tonight," she said playfully. "Gonna be the biggest dance of the year." I sipped my coffee and nodded, matching her energy. Wouldn't miss it for the world. But deep down, I wasn't planning to just show up as her husband. I was planning to end this clean and quiet. I spent the day finalizing what I needed. I knew Emily would be at the dance too, helping her family with the setup, as she always did. Emily, loyal, honest, the kind of person who didn't deserve to be tangled up in Samantha and Tom's mess. I wasn't sure how much she knew or suspected, but I was certain she'd want to know the truth. Just before heading to the dance, I slipped by her place. "Got a minute?" I asked when she answered the door. She gave me a puzzled look, nodding. "What's up?" We sat on her porch while I laid it all out. The barn, the bracelet, the lies, every bit of it. Emily sat frozen, blinking fast as I spoke. "Tom," she said quietly, shaking her head. "No, he wouldn't." "He did," I said flatly, "more than once." Her hands trembled slightly as she processed it all. "And you're sure?" "Seen it with my own eyes," I replied. "Wasn't going to come to you unless I knew for sure." Emily let out a shaky breath, wiped her eyes, and, after a long silence, said, "You going to the dance tonight?" I nodded. "So am I," she said, standing up straighter. "We'll go together." It wasn't even a question. When we walked into that barn dance, you'd have thought nothing was wrong. Folks greeted us like usual. The band was tuning up, and the air smelled like fresh hay and cinnamon. Samantha was near the refreshments table, laughing with some of the other wives, and Tom stood by the stage, leaning against a post like he owned the place. Samantha caught sight of us first. Me and Emily, arm in arm. Her smile faltered for just a second, but she quickly replaced it with a nervous chuckle. Tom, on the other hand, stiffened like he'd been hit between the eyes. I kept my cool. The night wasn't over yet. We made rounds, talked to folks, danced a little. I didn't rush it. I wanted every second of the evening to burn into their memories. Samantha didn't dare approach me, but I caught her watching from the corner of the room, eyes darting between me and Emily like she was trying to piece together how this wasn't the plan. The dance was winding down when I stepped up onto the small stage, tapped the microphone, and let the room settle. I looked right at Samantha and Tom, locking eyes without blinking. "I'd like to dedicate this last dance to two folks who've clearly been busy behind the scenes," I said, voice steady. "Tom and Samantha, the only two left without partners tonight." The silence was deafening. Then the laughter started. Not cruel, not mocking, just honest, from the gut, small-town laughter that spread like wildfire through the whole barn. Samantha's face drained of every ounce of color. Tom looked like he wanted the floorboards to swallow him whole. And me? I just stepped off the stage, offered my hand to Emily, and we danced. Slow, calm, like we're the only ones in the room. Because in that moment, we were... Sunday morning, I woke up to the sound of Samantha moving quietly around the kitchen, like she thought making breakfast early could undo the wreckage of the night before. I stayed in bed for a while, listening to the clatter of pans and the faint tune of an old hymn she hummed out of habit when she was nervous. When I finally walked in, she spun around, eyes wide like she'd been caught stealing. "Morning," she said too brightly, sliding a plate of pancakes onto the table like we hadn't just ripped the stitches out of our marriage in front of the entire town. I stared at her, not sitting, not responding, just waiting. The silence thickened. She bit her lip and tried again, softer. "Josh, I think we should talk." I pulled out a chair, but didn't touch the food. "I'm listening." She dropped into the seat across from me, wringing her hands. "It was a mistake," she blurted. "All of it. I don't know what I was thinking. Tom, the sneaking around, it just happened." I raised an eyebrow. "It just happened," I repeated, "like you tripped and fell in his barn every other afternoon." Her face flushed. "No, it wasn't like that. I felt alone, Josh. You were always busy, always out helping someone else, always leaving me here." She sniffled like she was gearing up for sympathy. "I felt like you didn't care anymore." I leaned back, crossing my arms. "So you found comfort with my best friend instead of telling me you were upset? Instead of being honest? You didn't feel ignored, Samantha. You felt entitled." The tears came then, full force, but I felt nothing. Not guilt, not sorrow. Just a quiet resolve that had been brewing inside me since the first day, I suspected. "Josh, please," she whispered. "We've been together too long to throw it all away." I kept my voice steady. "You threw it away the second you started hiding saddle blankets and sneaking off when you thought I wouldn't notice." She reached across the table for my hand, but I didn't move. "I can fix this," she said. "I'll stop seeing him. I'll do anything. We could go to counseling or take a trip, start fresh." "No," I said firmly. "You can't fix this with a weekend getaway or some half-hearted apologies. You didn't stumble into this. You walked right into it over and over, thinking you were smarter than me, thinking the town wouldn't notice, thinking Tom's barn door would cover for you. I shook my head. You weren't careful. You were careless. Her lip trembled. You'll regret this, she said, voice cracking. I'm your wife. Not anymore, I replied coldly. You're just the woman who thought I'd never find out. I stood up and walked to the door. She followed in a panic. Josh, please, she cried. Don't throw me away over one mistake. One mistake. I turned, staring her down. Samantha, you didn't make one mistake. You made 100, and you smiled every time you did it. I left her standing there in the kitchen, surrounded by her cold pancakes and empty promises, knowing full well there wasn't a word she could say to fix it. And I didn't even look back. The next few days passed like a storm that never fully broke. Samantha moved around the house like a stranger, quietly folding laundry, scrubbing dishes that didn't need scrubbing, and pretending that if she just played her part right, everything would rewind itself. I let her act. I let her cook extra meals, light candles at dinner, and suggest we talk it through like I hadn't already seen behind the curtain. The truth is, I wasn't mad anymore. Not the kind of mad that makes you shout and stomp. I was done, and done is colder than any anger could ever be. I spent most of my time fixing things around the farm. Loose fence posts, the old tractor starter. I even finished patching the south barn roof, something I'd put off for too long. Funny how much clearer life feels when you stop trying to convince yourself to hold on to what's already gone. Every evening, I'd spot Samantha watching me through the kitchen window, probably hoping I'd eventually come inside, sit down, and start acting like the fool I used to be. But those days were gone. By Wednesday, the town had fully caught wind of what happened. I could see it in the way folks greeted me at the feed store. Men who usually just gave me a polite nod were now patting me on the shoulder with quiet respect. The women gave me soft, knowing smiles. No one had to say a word. The dance had done all the talking. And Tom? He hadn't shown his face in town once since that night. Coward. Later that afternoon, Emily stopped by under the excuse of returning a borrowed tool. We ended up sitting on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the hills. You holding up? She asked, her voice steady but gentle. I nodded. Better than you'd think. She kicked at a loose board on the step. Tom's been hiding out at his dad's place. Too ashamed to show up, I suppose. I didn't comment. Didn't need to. She glanced at the house. She's still here. For now, I said, but not for long. The next morning, I left early and drove to the attorney's office in the next town over. I didn't want anyone local involved. Not because I was hiding, but because I didn't need the added gossip. The papers were simple, clean, no drawn-out battles or negotiations. I'd give Samantha the fair split, but she wasn't taking my land, my peace, or my pride. When I got home, she was waiting on the porch, wrapped in that old knit shawl like it might shield her from what was coming. I saw your truck head out early, she said cautiously. Everything okay? I handed her the envelope. It's over, Sam. Her hands trembled as she took it. You don't mean this. I mean every word, I replied. I'm not dragging this out. You can keep the house for now, but you're leaving the farm. Tears welled up instantly. Josh, please, she pleaded. This isn't you. We can work through this. I shook my head. We? There's no we left. She stepped forward, grabbing my arm. I'll change. I'll fix it. I'll do anything. I love you. The desperation in her voice might have worked once. Not anymore. No, you love winning, I said coldly. And you lost. I pulled away and walked into the barn, leaving her sobbing on the porch, knowing the papers in her hand were the last real connection she'd ever have to me. There was no scene, no screaming, just quiet resolve and a woman realizing too late that the game was over. And I wasn't playing anymore. Saturday morning rolled in heavy with fog, but Samantha was already up, pacing the front porch like a ghost that couldn't leave. I spotted her from the barn as I finished mending a gate, watching her wring her hands and stare down the driveway, as if hoping someone, maybe me, maybe Tom, would come save her from the mess she made. I took my time finishing the repairs before walking up to the house, boots crunching on the frosted gravel. She snapped to attention, eyes wide and red, like she hadn't slept at all. Josh, please, she started, voice trembling. I know you're hurt. I know I've made a mess of things, but can we just talk? Really talk, without you shutting me out. I leaned on the porch rail and said nothing, letting the silence twist the air between us. She took a shaky breath and pushed on. I messed up. I know I did. But I panicked. I felt like you'd stopped seeing me, like you were slipping away. So you ran to Tom? I asked calmly. My best friend? That was the solution. She stepped forward, clutching the rail across from me. It wasn't about him. It was about feeling something again. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I thought I could stop it before it got bad. I scoffed. It got bad the moment you made it secret. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I didn't want to lose you, she whispered. I thought I'd come clean after the dance, once things felt settled. I narrowed my eyes. So you were going to keep lying until you felt like it was safe to confess? She fell silent, biting her lip. The answer was written all over her face. She changed tactics fast. We can fix this. We can. We worked through tough stuff before. You, me, we don't quit. The desperation in her voice echoed off the empty fields. I shook my head slowly. I'm not quitting. I'm finally cleaning house. Her face crumpled. You're serious? You're really just going to throw everything away? I took a step toward her. I'm not throwing anything away. I'm cutting out what's rotting. She reached out like she could physically stop me from leaving. Please. I'll stop seeing Tom. I'll do counseling. Church. Whatever you want. I stared her down without a flicker of sympathy. The only thing I want is for you to pack your things. She gasped like the wind had been knocked out of her. You don't mean that, she whispered. You're just angry. No, I said flatly. Anger left a while ago. This is clarity. The next few days, she tried every angle. Leaving letters on my pillow. Making my favorite meals. Wearing the necklace I bought her on our 5th anniversary like it might conjure up old feelings. But it wasn't anger keeping me distant. It was that I'd finally seen her clearly, not as the woman I married, but as the one who stood there now, grasping at straws not out of love, but fear of losing the comfort she'd taken for granted. When I left the divorce papers on the kitchen table with her name neatly printed at the top, there was no note, no apology, no second-guessing. I drove out to Emily's and spent the evening helping her clear a fallen tree from her pasture. We worked quietly, the kind of easy silence that only comes from people who aren't pretending. By the time I got back, the house was quiet. Samantha was gone, and with her, every trace of the life I thought we had. But standing there in the empty kitchen, I realized it wasn't emptiness filling the room. It was peace, and I wasn't about to let it go. The following weeks settled over me like a long, overdue breath. Samantha's absence wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was just gone like fog lifting after a long storm. I didn't find myself missing the sound of her humming in the kitchen or the hurried footsteps on the porch. Instead, the house breathed easy without her, like it had been waiting just as long as I had to stretch out and be still. I threw myself into the farm with a focus I hadn't felt in years. There were fences to mend, cattle to rotate, winter prep to finish. The work wasn't any different, but I was no second-guessing, no cloud hanging over me. Just steady, honest labor. And for the first time, I wasn't doing it to prove anything to anyone. Not to Samantha, not to the town, not even to myself. I was just doing it because it was mine. Emily became a regular sight, and not because either of us said it out loud. She'd stop by with pie or extra sea bags, offering to help in that quiet way of hers. We'd work shoulder to shoulder without needing to fill the space with idle chatter. When we did talk, it wasn't about Samantha or Tom or the whispers still floating around town. It was about the creek running a little high this season, about how her grandma used to bake pies without measuring anything, about the old couple down the road who still danced every Saturday on their porch. Real things. Things that made you feel human again. I won't lie and say the town forgot overnight. Small towns don't forget, but the story softened. Folks stopped looking at me like I was the man who got betrayed and started seeing me as the man who stood tall after. Men tipped their hats. Women offered kind smiles. Even the older folks, the ones who usually stayed quiet about scandal, made a point to stop me after church or at the feed store to let me know they saw it too, that I'd handled it the right way. I didn't see Tom much, just caught wine through the grapevine that he'd holed up at his uncle's ranch out west, licking his wounds. As for Samantha, she tried once to call, left a voicemail I didn't bother listening to. I deleted it, just like I deleted the hope that things could ever go back to how they were. The house changed too, slowly. I took down the framed photos of our wedding, replaced them with photos of the land, of sunsets and cattle drives, of my father and grandfather standing proud on the same dirt. I cleared out old clutter, opened windows I hadn't touched in years, and let the air flow through every corner like it was reclaiming the place too. It was on a quiet Friday, just as the sun melted into the horizon, that Emily and I ended up sitting on the tailgate of my truck, sipping sweet tea, without a word between us for a long stretch. Finally, she said, "You ever think about what's next?" I looked out over the fields, the orange glow catching the tops of the grass. "Every day." She smiled. "Good." That was it. No big speeches, no grand gestures. Just two people who knew where they stood, and more importantly, where they weren't going back. By the time the barn dance rolled around again the next month, folks weren't whispering about me anymore. They were waving, laughing, offering me slices of pie and fresh cups of cider. And when Emily and I stepped onto the dance floor, there wasn't a hint of scandal, just two people who'd weathered something ugly and came out clean. I wasn't just free of Samantha. I was free of every piece of me that thought I needed someone like her to be whole. And standing there under the string lights, with the band playing soft and the town smiling around me, I realized I didn't lose anything worth missing. I'd found something better. Peace. And I wasn't about to let it go. Thank you for listening to the end. I hope you enjoyed it very much. Don't forget to give a like, and tell us in the comments what you would do in such a situation.